Hey everybody, welcome back to Wednesdays with Watson. If you have been following along with this journey, by now you know that my name is Amy Watson and I am your host. I am so excited to be back here with you today. We have named this season of the podcast PTSD, Jesus, and Me. And today we are mid-season, and that is so hard to believe. I am so grateful for those of you who have spent time with me on these podcasts, who have messaged me, and even for those of you who have shared it and helped get the podcast out there. Sincere gratitude to you. But we are mid-season. And guys, we talked about the podcast evolving at the beginning, and certainly it is doing that. We are learning, we are growing. One thing I can tell you is that today's podcast is for 100% of the population of planet Earth. And so I want you to kind of sit back and drop into this beginning of this conversation. These two words are on my website, and they are two words that are so important to me, and I want them to be important to you because they are true. This is the first podcast of the You Matter series, because you do matter. Let's go, guys. 2 a.m. That is the magic time for me. My body seems to like to wake me up at that time, and any horrible thing that can happen or that I can remember, I guarantee you if I look at the clock, it's 2 a.m. And it was about 2 a.m. about 2 hours after the last podcast record actually dropped. And I woke up with full-on flashbacks, and I, as very common with flashbacks, don't remember what they were, but I was also so riddled with shame. I literally put my head in my hands and I thought to myself, what have I done? I just basically laid my soul bare out there for the world to hear. The voices of shame were shouting, and a lot of them sounded like my voice, and they were telling me, Amy, you are your mistakes. You are that person with those unfortunate negative attention-seeking behaviors that come with PTSD. Shame was telling me that night, in the middle of the night, that's who you are, and you just told the whole world that you have an attention-seeking behavior, and you plan to continue. So I just kind of laid there for a few minutes, and I wondered, wow, can I unpublish this podcast? I looked at the stats, and only one person had listened to it. But I didn't actually even know how to unpublish it because I don't publish it. My producer does. And so I was like, I can't unpublish it. So maybe I should try to stop getting my heart from pounding like it's racing somewhere really quickly, because it was just pounding from the flashback and from this sense of shame that I heard and that I felt. I laid there and I thought, what have I done? What have I done? Also, I kept hearing various, mostly well-meaning voices from my childhood, their voice actually saying, you should be ashamed of yourself. And I am indeed ashamed. But I also know that that's the game, and we can't lose that game. And so I want to fight. Here's a spoiler alert, by the way, Jesus wins in the end. I knew when I started the podcast that I have dubbed my pandemic podcast that PTSD was an important topic. Jesus, so important to the story, as it's his, not mine. I know that, and you know that, and I say that hopefully on every one. It's so important that I put his name in the title. But this middle of the night flashback was as bad as I had really had in a long, long time. You know, as Chrissy and I sat and chatted for hours in that closet, it was fun. It was a blast. We laughed and had lots of good memories, and it was cool to reflect on the faithfulness of God. But we did that for hours, and it stirred up all kinds of emotions. So I got up that night after the podcast had been up for about 2.5 hours at that point, and jumped in the shower. The cold water in the middle of the night woke me up a little bit and kind of reset me to some degree. But I walked out on my porch. My back porch is screened in. It's one of my favorite places on the planet. And the summer air just kind of helped also wake me up from that panic, because it's July in Florida and the air is thick and it's heavy, and I couldn't help but think that the climate matched that of my heart. I was so mad at myself for telling you guys about my attention-seeking behavior on that podcast that took that unintended turn with Chrissy. The one that we talked about was dishonesty on the last podcast. But as I sat there, the sounds of the night reminded me who is actually in control. And then I just remember the words of this song that I love so much. If you gave your life for them, so will I. If creation seeks to praise you, so will I. And so if you hear my voice right now, you are them to me. I will lay down on this, and we will keep fighting just for one of you. So now it's like 3:30 in the morning, and I walk back into my house and finally just relented and took some medicine and finally fell back asleep. But those voices of shame were loud. They were telling me that I was worthless. They were telling me to stop doing this podcast, to stop writing. They were telling me to stop telling the world that you don't have to live in shame and guilt. I hoped a few more hours of sleep would reset me. Sometimes that happens when you fall back asleep, because I planned to leave the podcast up because I knew it to be obedience. But I also understand that I'm going to be working through this shame thing, and it's here to stay. It wants to take my value. It wants to take yours too. So what we aren't going to do is quit, because you matter and I matter. And so we're going to continue to stay with this. We're going to continue to evolve. We're going to continue to heal. Because I started this podcast to give people hope. Hope that you can heal from unspeakable trauma. And yeah, mainly this season is for PTSD patients, for people who love them, for people who minister to them. But this very podcast, as I said in the intro, is for 100% of the population. I have started, as I just jokingly said, I've started calling this my pandemic podcast. Apparently that's a pretty popular thing, as you can't even buy a mic on Amazon right now. But anyway, I started this podcast at a time, who knows where we are in this pandemic, the beginning, middle, end, but I started it, and right now on this day that I'm recording it is at a time when hope seems to be at an all-time low. I firmly believe that hope is the balm that we all seek for the pain, but we always seek it in other things. And then hopelessness, when left unchecked, is tragic, and leads to all of these attention-seeking behaviors that we're going to talk about, and a whole lot other things. The Bible says that hope deferred makes a heart sick. It's so true. It's so true for all of us. I know that because I get messages from people all the time now who have questions and are seeking help, and I'm way in over my head because I know that I'm only qualified to tell you my story and things that work for me. But the message is the same from everyone who messages or emails. They are running low on hope. 2020 has drained us of our earthly hope, every single person on this planet, and dimmed our light. And so everyone is feeling a little needy in some ways. That isn't a bad thing. Needs drive us to solutions. I think it's the solutions that we need to watch, and we will definitely be talking about that. So, because this podcast is for 100% of the population, here's what I want to make sure that I want to continue to repeat over and over in this podcast is we all want to be seen. We all want to be known. We all want to be loved. We all want to be heard. We all want to be valued. And here's the great news, guys. We are all of those things. I am no different. And as a result of even sitting behind this microphone and the feedback that I get from it, makes me feel those things, all those things that I just mentioned. Seen, known, loved, heard, and valued. But as much as I love my people, I have learned the hard way that my eternal hope and value doesn't come from people, but from God. And so I want to bring shame back into the conversation, because shame can't take it, because shame didn't give me my value. God gave me my value. Did you guys know that it only took 25 verses in the Bible. So Genesis 1:26 addresses our value, where God says that we are made in his image. 25 verses into the Bible, value gets addressed. We are made in his image, which is so amazing and so unable to be comprehended. Psalm 139 describes how precious we are in his sight and that we are formed in his image again. But it only takes 6 verses for the psalmist to acknowledge that, whoa, this idea of value is way, way in over my head. Depends on which translation you're reading, but it is everything from, it's too lofty for me to understand, it's too much for me to understand. But Genesis 1:26 does tell us that we are made in that image, equally loved by him, with a special purpose, with special giftings. And yeah, with special pain. Special unique pain. That word unique is there on purpose to remind you not to compare your pain with mine or anyone else's. In my sphere of influence, I hear a lot of horror stories, especially as it pertains to domestic violence, and even I'm tempted to compare my stories. Don't do it, guys. It's a dark road, and it just makes shame grow, 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 grow. Shame grows in the dark, and that's a dark road. I wasn't given any of the things that you need to walk your road, and you weren't given the things to walk mine. And that's why we don't compare. But we can help each other, and that is the point. Community. It's one of the 3 C's. Because besides me wanting you to know the peace that only comes with knowing with Jesus, my biggest wish for you is that you get connected with a community. Please go get connected with a community, I beg you. Chrissy is one of my community ride or die members. And as I mentioned, we had a blast recording those 3 podcasts. Those conversations are simply too much to recap, and so I would certainly encourage you to go back. But it was really fun and interesting and painful and all kinds of weird emotions. That experience of her unjumbling some of my PTSD memories was all of those things. I already mentioned several times now the shame that I felt after hitting the publish button, and by that I mean my producer hit the publish button. But the last that podcast was also fraught with other issues. We had so many audio issues that everything that you can imagine happened. So I knew that it wasn't an award-winning audio experience, but the last part of that conversation took that unexpected turn, and the content was too anointed for me to reproduce, and so we left it. And I'm telling you guys, I still regret it this very moment. I'm fighting, y'all. I'm fighting. I've been working through this shame because on that podcast, we began to talk about what you will hear me refer to a lot in the next several podcasts as attention-seeking behaviors. And in that particular podcast, Chrissy and I had some hard conversation about one of my own attention-seeking behaviors, which I had battled most of my life, and especially in the early days of my friendship with her, by way of dishonesty. Certainly, I have and continue to work through some of these things in counseling, and obviously I understand why I use dishonesty to deflect, to ensure safety, especially in the middle of my domestic violence marriage, or because I was just needing to feel seen, known, loved, heard, valued. I don't know that even this time last year I would have had the emotional health to do what we did by hitting publish on that podcast, or even understanding this idea of attention-seeking behaviors and why we have them. And so I often think that Psalm 139:6 was written just for me because that whole concept of value is way too lofty for me to understand. My real enemy and your real enemy, the father of lies, confusion, and chaos, likes to make us all forget our value. And you're not going to be any different from me, whether you have PTSD or not. When we forget our value, we begin to exhibit attention-seeking behaviors, which often turns into this shame that I keep talking about. When we forget our Genesis 1:26 status, made in the image of God, attention-seeking behavior has the opportunity to abound. And I want you to remember that community that I keep talking to you about, here's something that you really need to do. You need to make sure that community also looks like accountability. You need to make sure you have some people in your community that will call you out and that will call you higher and that will make you mad to the point that you will evaluate. So make sure your community, some people in your community, looks like accountability. As I've mentioned 3 times now, this podcast is for 100% of the population, because even if you don't have PTSD, you have attention-seeking behaviors. That just makes you human. Now, shame drives some of this for sure, but then it's the hamster wheel where shame comes from a variety of attention-seeking behaviors, and it just becomes normal to feel shameful all the time. What also becomes the norm is our complete inability to take care of ourselves and all the things that we do with things that we value. When we forget our image bearer status, we really have this inability to remember that we are seen, known, loved, heard, and valued. I know the devil loves dark corners. He likes us to live in this guilt and shame, and most of all, he is a master salesman. He convinces us of needs that we don't have, and then he gives us ill-fated solutions to needs that we actually do have. These are the kinds of things that nobody talks about, but they're common to every single one of us. Most of us just go to sleep within our minds at night, and I've decided to tell the world, hit record, and have it published, and then fight the shame and the inability to remember my value after it. But I am doing that because I'm tired, guys. So tired of watching. I'm tired of doing this, and I'm tired of watching it, of living in guilt and shame, because it does not have to be that way at all. I am going to continue to keep locking myself in this closet, and I'm going to keep doing this because he gave his life for you. The least I can do is share authentically with you, even when it brings the opportunity for my own shame. I spent so many years frustrated and self-loathing about this idea of attention-seeking behaviors, and never really more so than when I was just 14 years old. When I was 14 years old, I had been living with foster parents for about 18 months, and on June 6, 1987, those foster parents who had taken care of me when the state removed me from the state of Florida, but from my mom, they took care of me for 18 months, but they had their own ministry and their own family, were good people, and because of some of these attention-seeking behaviors, I needed more help than they could give me. And so, June 6, 1987, I found my 14-year-old self standing underneath a sign that said Faith at Children's Home. It was just another abandonment in my mind at that point. It was a day that still makes my heart beat fast and my voice tremble, because even though those were the best years of my life, that was a hard day. So that my foster parents left, and it was lunchtime, and I made my way into the main building where all the children were housed. And it was because it was lunchtime, as I mentioned, everybody was there. These 2 huge rooms with these big long wooden tables where everybody sat, and 2 big rooms. One of them where everyone ate, and then a big kitchen, obviously an industrial sized kitchen, because, there were a lot of kids to feed. And so they were eating shrimp or something that was donated from Taco Bell, and that's a whole nother story for another day. All I know is I didn't want any Taco Bell shrimp. And so I found a place to hide in between this industrial-sized refrigerator and this cabinet. And there was a little red chair in there, almost as if it were inviting me to sit there so that the new kid could hide. And so I did. I kind of sneaked back there a little bit, and it was dark, and I could hear all the goings on of what was happening, and I certainly didn't understand how I could hear the laughter of children, but I did. I heard all of those things, and then so I'm just kind of processing all of this in this little dark space that might have been a foot long, where I could just barely kind of shimmy myself in there. I was not who I am today, outgoing, gregarious, will take over a room. I was very shy, very wounded, and really didn't want anybody to see me. So pretty much the complete opposite of what I am today. And so when this head popped in my little oasis there, my eyes probably were the size of saucers, and it was the whitest hair I had ever seen in my life, with a Southern accent that I couldn't reproduce if I tried. She said, well, hello. And I just stared at her. I didn't even answer her back. And she had as I mentioned, the most Southern accent of anybody I've ever heard in my life. She hailed from Maggie Valley, North Carolina. She said to me, has anybody told you today? Again, just staring at her, but had been taught enough manners to go, ma'am. She said, has anybody told you today that they love you? I'm quiet here for a second because I'm remembering that moment. My foster parents certainly had told me they loved me, but there was something different about this. So I just looked up and said, no, ma'am. She said, well, I love you. I'm Mom McGowan. That day, even though it wasn't overnight, created an incredible bond between Mom McGowan and me. She and Dad had started the children's home. That day where she just gave me what I just wanted, some attention. She saw me. She saw me. She heard me. She valued me. She knew I was there. I felt known. I felt all those things I keep talking about. And so it created a bond that I had not known up until that point. But it also created a bit of a monster. A couple weeks ago, I gave an example on substance abuse where one is too many and 10,000 is not enough. And so in some ways, when I got attention from Mom McGowan, it was like that. I sought to fill all of those pains and that abandonment and all that stuff that I had gotten to at 14 years old. 7 abusers, abandoned by my mom, really every kind of abuse that you can think. I was seeking to fill those empty spaces with her, and it didn't matter how much attention she gave me, I wanted more. My lies to her were kind of like they were to Chrissy. They were just lies that would get me attention, lies that would physically put me in her proximity so that I could be around her. But when I would exhibit those attention-seeking behaviors, and in that case a lie, and I'd lay in bed at night, and our room at the children's home had 6 twin beds, and there were 5 other people in the room with me, and so we learned to cry silently, and I would lay there at night feeling guilty about lying, because I was so convinced that I was worthless because I needed her attention, and that frustrated me so much that I needed that attention. I didn't understand that I simply had unmet needs, that I was doing whatever I could do to meet them. Just a human condition, not necessarily just a PTSD one. I don't know how many of you at night put your heads down and feel some of this emptiness that I'm describing, or feel guilty about whatever form of attention-seeking behavior you had that day. But I know that I have spent so many years self-loathing and not living to my potential because I simply could not understand this need for attention from other people. Why couldn't God be enough? Perhaps I was just too broken, and I really did believe that. Until recent years, my tribe and my community have locked arms with me and ushered me to Him through simply living their lives and making sure I was at least attempting to live mine, making me feel all those things that I am, valued, loved, seen, known, heard. And so those were nights as a young Amy that I didn't understand this need for attention. And so this attention-seeking behavior came out in ways to put me near her. But it didn't matter how much attention she gave me because I didn't understand my value. What mattered was the attention that she did give me. So the amount of attention didn't matter, but what mattered was the attention she did give me drove me to the cross and to Jesus as the only person who can even sort of make this pain bearable. And we would have these great lean-in conversations, and I love some lean-in conversations, and I still have them with Mom McGowan, and we still have that bond. I do love a lean-in conversation, and that is why I love community so much. As Chrissy and I were unpacking a little more of these side effects or consequences of post-traumatic stress disorder, depends on which one of us you ask. I say consequence, she says side effects. We realize that some of them are certainly pronounced in people with trauma, but as I've mentioned, I think 4 times now, if everyone were being 100% honest, we all have times, places, and spaces where we just need. And because we're resourceful human beings, we will do what we have to do to fill those needs, like I did at the children's home, even as worthless as it made me feel those nights in that twin bed. Think about it, though. From a very early age, we are built this way. This is evidence like if you watch a baby throw their bottle on the floor, only for you to pick it up and hand it back to them. That will go on for as many times as you will pick the bottle up and hand it to the baby. There's no malicious intent on the part of the baby. The baby just wants to be seen, known, heard, loved, and valued. Same with us. We're just grown-up babies throwing the bottle on the floor. But when the parents actually pick the child up and hug them and love them, now they feel valued, the need is met. I don't need you to pick the bottle up off the floor for me. So as Chrissy and I were talking about this, and we have these lean-in conversations all the time, like I used to have with Mom McGowan, as we were talking about this, she said something that stopped me in my tracks. She was actually talking at that point about her own trauma, some of which she has agreed to share in due time. But I was literally leaning into that conversation, but then she said something that made me sit back in my chair. And this is what it was. She said, what if I am too broken to fix? What if your listeners feel too broken to fix? So I kind of just stared at her and got up and left, to be honest with you, because I knew that she was trying to spur my creativity. But I also knew that she wanted an answer from me, somebody that she trusts as her own ride or die community. So I thought as I walked back over to my house, because Chrissy and I are neighbors, man, I started this podcast for Susie Smith and Mary Wright. And now one of my best friends in the whole world, with tear-filled eyes, has just asked me if she is too broken to fix. So I walked into my door, and I was like, yeah, I know that feeling. I remembered it from that twin bed at the children's home where I thought it was worthless because I craved Mom McGowan's attention. I remembered it from the shame I felt early in the years of my PTSD diagnosis as I continued to pile attention-seeking behavior on top of attention-seeking behavior. We're going to talk about quite a few of those, by the way. I remember feeling too broken to fix. I remember wishing I were too broken to fix because that meant I could live my life with plenty of excuse and zero purpose. But the reality is, as hard as I try, I know that I love a God who redeems the years that the locusts have stolen. I've stopped asking why he stole the years, and I look forward to great anticipation to watch him continue to grow and restore the years and purpose. And if you hear my voice right now, you are my purpose. This being too broken to fix concept, coupled with the unintended side effects of PTSD or negative consequences or whatever we're calling it, or just being human in general, can be lethal. And I knew that. And I knew that, like I said, while she was trying to spur on my creativity, she just wanted an answer to my question. So, yeah, I left her house, but it sent me directly to Scripture. Because I wanted to be able to tell you, to tell her, hey, I wanted to be able to tell myself that I'm not too broken to fix. Because remember, I'm still feeling shame because I've told the world about some of my shame or some of my behaviors that made me feel shameful. I remembered the story in the Bible of the lady who was healed simply because she touched the hem of Jesus' robe. So I went searching for that story and I found it in Mark chapter 5. She was a lady with a bleeding disorder, and the Bible tells us that she had been seeking healing from this disorder for about 12 years. It is thought that she spent all of her money and all of her resources trying to fix this bleeding disorder that was probably gynecological in nature. And so, as we know in that region, especially during that time, women basically were to be seen and not heard. None of the things that we're talking about today. It is thought that her bleeding disorder, as I mentioned, was gynecological in nature, and so that would have put her even more of an outcast, bringing more opportunity for, here's that word again, shame. I bet she also felt broken. I bet she didn't feel seen, known, loved, heard, or valued. Here's the thing that stopped me in my tracks, though. Because she made a decision one day to get up, leave her house, and find Jesus because she heard he was going to be in town. Now, he wasn't coming in town to hang out. He was en route to another miracle. She just knew he was passing through. I bet if I could have asked, she probably would have phrased her question, just like Chrissy did. She had been seeking a solution for her brokenness for 12 years. Am I too broken to fix? But what was so amazing to me, and I want it to be to you too, is that in a last-ditch effort, she made a decision to go looking for Jesus. Think about that for a minute. Think about what would happen if in your darkest days, whether they're PTSD days or human days, you got up and went looking for Jesus. The Bible says that when she touched the hem of his garment, Jesus felt the power go out of him. He said, "Who touched me?" And when she answered, "It was me," he said to her, "Your faith has made you whole." I was sitting on my porch the next morning, and I was reading the passage again. The way Jesus chose to answer that question, "Your faith has made you whole," infers that she was broken, doesn't it? Certainly, we are all broken. It is the human condition. And as I've mentioned, PTSD only pronounces that. I think about this lady's decision to go find Jesus and how that decision changed everything for her. I could relate to that too, because I was reminded of those early decisions to seek community, to go to church. I wish I could say that I sought Jesus the way that lady did in her brokenness, but because I made a few decisions to seek community, Jesus came with them. So as we move on with the second half of the season, I say to Chrissy, and I say to any of you asking the different form of her question, no, you're not too broken to fix. And the best way I can see getting, air quote, fixed is to go looking for community and value. If you lay your head down at night and think about the things that you did that day to garner attention of another, you need to feel very normal, especially right now in the middle of a pandemic. But also know that you don't have to feel that way. Your faith can make you whole. Our mission here is not done. I am not quitting. I'm going to keep telling you shameful behaviors. I have spent this entire podcast setting up the rest of the season. The next few podcasts will continue to feature consequences of post-traumatic stress disorder as they exhibit themselves in all sorts of attention-seeking behaviors. Because as Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. And knowledge puts shame in its most famous representative in the bright light of revelation. So I want y'all to come with me because we're going to do this thing together. Those of you who feel like I do right now, like your shame defines you and you can't remember your value, I want you to stay with me because we are going to be straight up real and raw. We're going to be transparent. We're going to be true. We can have PTSD. We can love people with PTSD. We can minister to people with PTSD. We can be human. We can need attention. We can need hope. But none of that has to rule us. So we're going to call it out of the corner. So shame has been defined as this: I am a mistake, not I made a mistake. So we are going to call shame out of the corner. We're going to legit call it out of the corner. We're going to shine light on it. And like I said, we're going to be real, we're going to be raw, we're going to be transparent, we're going to be truthful. And so over these next 2 weeks, I'm going to be praying for everyone who hears this to know that shame is not who you are. Shame is not who you are. You, my friend, are far from a mistake. And shame has no game with you or with me. And definitely has no game with the one who made you. You matter. It's been on my website since I opened it. You matter. Do not forget that. Keep fighting. Keep praying. Keep remembering you're made in the image of God. Don't feel weird when you can't understand that concept. You can borrow my faith right now if you don't have any of your own. Great song by Bebo Norman. I am looking forward to being back with you guys in 2 weeks where we will dive deep back into these attention-seeking behaviors. Chrissy will be back so you don't have to hear 2 versions of stories. And until then, I want you to live loved. I want you to live chosen. I want you to live courageous. More than anything, I want you to remember you are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and most of all, you are valued. You are a precious child of the Most High God. thank you for spending a few minutes of your time with me today. I am so honored, always so honored when you have chosen to do that. We will continue to publish these podcasts every other Wednesday. The best way for you to just automatically have that downloaded to your device is to hit that subscribe button. If you're so inclined to leave us a rating as well as a review, that will help us as we continue to try to get the podcast out there to those that need it. So I would be honored if you would also consider following me on social media. I am on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Instagram is author Amy Watson is my handle, and then Facebook and Twitter are Amy Watson Author. You can also reach me on my website, amywatsonauthor.com. Thank you again for spending time with me, and I look forward to spending some more time with you 2 weeks from today.